Welcome to the 154th episode of Authors Love Bookstores, broadcasting here on a mighty blaze. I'm Kimberly Hensle Lowrance. I host and produce this show with my friend and fellow writer, Joe Moldover, and we are so glad that you have tuned in today. Let me get right to it and introduce our guests. I am joined today by two writers, booksellers, teachers of writing, book experts. Our first guest is FREDA Love Smith. FREDA is a writer, teacher, and retired rock drummer. Are you ever retired though? Like once a drummer, always a drummer?
That may be true. I still play tambourine sometimes.
Okay, there you go. FREDA's books, she has two books. The first is called Red Velvet Underground, a rock memoir with recipes. And her second book, which came out this year, is called I Quit Everything, How One Woman's Addiction to Quitting Helped Her Confront Bad Habits and Embrace Midlife. She's a teacher at Northeastern. You can tell I live in Boston, Northwestern University, Lesley University, and Bookends and Beginnings. And that's the bookstore we're going to talk about today. And FREDA's the programming director for Bookends University. We talked about her being a drummer. She played drums with Blake Babies, Antenna, Mysteries of Life, Gentleman Caller, Some Girls, and Sunshine Boys. She has a great career. We're going to talk about that a little bit as well. And FREDA is a contributing writer to the Sound of Our Town podcast. She reviews nonfiction for Booklist as well. And she lives in Evanston, Illinois. Welcome, FREDA. We're happy to have you. And you're joined with Kate Harding. Kate is the events manager at Bookends Beginnings in Evanston, Illinois. Kate's also a writer. She's been the author, co-author, or co-editor of 4 books, and you can find her writing in a number of online and hold in your hand publications, including the Washington Post, Cosmopolitan, Newsweek, LA Times, Salon, and many others. She's also a creative writing instructor and lives in Chicago. Welcome. We're so happy to have you with us today.
Thanks.
Yes, so eagle-eyed viewers may know that we had Bookends and Beginnings on earlier this year, and we had Julia Fine on. Okay, and Kate had one of those things where you plan so hard, and then the universe conspires against you, and her internet went down, so we couldn't have her on in person then. And I said, please come on, and so we finally are getting her on the screen today. And when I asked, who do you want to talk to? She said, FREDA. And so here we are today. So we're very excited to talk with you both. And I was excited to spend time in your work, FREDA. I had a lot to think about while I was reading this book. I may have been counting all of the caffeine milligrams in my tea, questioning a lot of my own choices. And I should say to our audience, we'd love your questions. So please put them below the broadcast if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll get to as many as we can later on. So FREDA, tell us, let's start. Tell us about Bookends and Beginning. Tell us how you're connected to this bookstore and what makes the store so special.
This store is a huge place for me in my life. And it has been since it very first opened, which was 9 years ago. Yeah. Is that right? So soon after the bookstore first opened, my first book, Red Velvet Underground, came out, and I launched it in the bookstore. It was my first book. It was my first bookstore event. It was such an incredibly big deal to me, really meaningful. And ever since then, I've been good friends with this place, with the owners. I buy my books here. Throughout the whole of the pandemic, I feel like Bookends and Beginnings really got me through. I could order my books. I could come by and pick them up curbside or have them sent to me. Just had such a fond feeling, a deep appreciation, was rooting them on to survive the pandemic, to make it through, because it's just a really important place in the Evanston community. And then Bookends and Beginnings became my place of work. So as I read about in my book about quitting my full-time academic job, kind of phasing into work that felt like a better match, that felt more meaningful to me. And I worked as the interim events manager before wonderful Kate came on board. And I also worked with the owner, Nina Barrett, to launch what we call Bookends University, which is the bookstore's curricular initiative. So we actually teach classes in the bookstore. We teach classes online. They're all led by authors. I teach sometimes. And it's just very affordable, accessible community education. And then, of course, I also had my book launch for I Quit Everything here. It's still where I come and buy my books too. So it's kind of a second home
Yeah.
to me. Bookends and Beginnings is a key place on my map of the world.
Oh, I love that. And to our audience, we're putting links below to Bookends and Beginnings, to buying Freda's books from Bookends and Beginnings, to Bookends University. So please go check all that out. There are many, many links. So just, keep an eye on them. Kate, talk about your evolution to this, coming to this bookstore. How did you come here? And you are the events manager. So, which is always, I think, like the most fun job.
It is. That's exactly why I applied for it, was because
Yeah.
it sounded really fun.
We've been doing the whole time we've been doing the show. I mean, I came in thinking, oh, someday I want to run a bookstore, and now I'm like, I want to run the events of the bookstore. So tell us a little bit about that role you have, and also tell us about your favorite author event. Freda's launches notwithstanding.
Okay. So a couple things. Basically, I have done almost everything in the book industry except print them. I have been an editor, a publicist, an author, and so I started as a bookseller a few years ago just because a friend who owns a bookstore, a used bookstore, was hiring, and I was like, you know what? I've always had my little bookstore fantasy. Did that for a little while. And then I saw this job advertised, and it was, Freda did it part-time, but this was, they decided, okay, we're going to invest in a full-time events manager. And I was like, you know what? I know a lot of writers. I know what events should look like from both sides. I have done, various event planning things too as a publicist in my past, and doesn't matter. And so I was like, and this would be great. And I've always wanted to work in a new bookstore too. So it's a way to branch out, and it's been great. And I would say had so many wonderful author events since I started, but probably my favorite is actually one that Freda booked before I got here. And it's a woman named Amy Bazzari, who wrote this very cool cookbook that was based on Civilian Conservation Corps recipes. So it was a historical thing too. Yeah. And we both thought it was such a cool idea. And like, nobody signed up.
Oh no.
And one person came. But Amy was so gracious and lovely and just sat down with me and the one person who came and gave us her little PowerPoint and told us all about the Civilian Conservation Corps. And it was wonderful. And it was one of those things that could have been a disaster, but ended up being such a lovely experience.
I love that. I just have to interject really quickly that when Kate's resume came in for the full-time event manager job, the owner showed it to me, because we were both just in complete disbelief. Like, she's so perfect. It's like the universe made her for this job. And we're like, oh, she's not real. And like, this can't possibly be. And like, oh, she'll never take it. Like, anyway, it was just like a dream come true.
Wonderful.
If I may.
I want to say hi to Renee. Renee, thanks for tuning in from Southeast Florida. We're happy to have you. What was the name of Amy's cookbook? We want to find it and put it in the chat so people can go check it out.
The Civilian Conservation Corps cookbook.
Okay, great. So
CORPS.
Great. Joe will find that and put it below so people can go check it out and give Amy some support. Even though many years have passed, I'm sure the cookbook has done really well. One of the things I found out while researching your store and preparing for the show is that the store moved recently. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the sort of challenges that indie bookstores have that maybe we don't think about. And that is space and like staying in your space and rising rents and those challenges, and sort of how has Bookends and Beginnings responded to that, and what can customers or supporters do about that, or what they should know about that as they make their decisions about buying books?
Well, for us, it was very much a matter of the landlord raised the rent to where it was untenable. We had been in this space that everyone loved, that had been a bookstore for many, many years, a different one before this, often an alley. And so the store was known as Evanston's speakeasy for books. It was kind of just this amazing space with amazing vibes. But we couldn't afford it. And that's the problem, is unless you own the building yourself, which has a whole bunch of other headaches, you're at the mercy of whoever owns it at a given time. So it became clear we had to move. And the wonderful side of that story, it was very stressful for everyone involved, but the community really came out to support us. And we just put out the word, like, we have to move. It's going to cost a lot of money fast. And so there was a GoFundMe, and, our and we just, the store got very busy during that time too. So people really just showed up to try and give us the infusion of money we needed to make it happen and keep this institution in Evanston, because there is another primarily children's bookstore in town, but like even Barnes and Noble, we outlasted them. So,
Wow.
So this is the big community bookstore in a college town that is right next to a major city.
So it sounds like in a time of crisis, you really saw that your community was there for you, which is what we want to hear.
We have amazing customers.
Excellent. So Freda, I want to talk about I Quit Everything. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Your Kirkus review is terrific. The book is called A Humorous, Insightful Memoir of Self-Improvement. You had other feedback about the book. It's been called Heartening and Challenging. I liked this one. Reading I Quit Everything is like having a heart-to-heart with your smartest friend. I got to share another one. I Quit Everything doesn't ask us to quit. It asks us to pay attention, to listen to our bodies, to find what serves us and hold on like the holy goddamn grail. I loved it.
Megan Steelstra.
Yes.
Such a great writer.
Right? It's like there's accomplishment in finishing the book, obviously, and bringing it into the world, but then to get positive feedback is also just, it must be wonderful.
It's the greatest thing. Yeah.
Can you tell our audience a little bit about I Quit Everything?
Yeah, so I Quit Everything is a weird little memoir, kind of a long experimental essay, I think of it, that documents my pandemic-driven experiment to quit a bunch of addictive habits and practices and substances. It definitely happened during the pandemic, and it was spurred by the events of January 6th, actually, and just this like compounding stress and events of the world that felt very much out of my control, and just feeling that the habits that I'd been turning to help me cope were not really doing me any favors anymore. So, I mean, like a lot of people, I was drinking a lot more during the pandemic, just whiskey, was eating more, was eating a lot of sugar, and I was scrolling mindlessly for hours some days on social media. And just all of these things, it hit me in a moment of realization that I just needed like a clean break. I needed to cut all these habits out. So I quit booze and weed and sugar and social media and caffeine, like all of them. I did one a month. So it was like a gradual dropping of things.
Yeah.
And just to kind of see what would happen and see kind of what was left of me when I got rid of all of these things.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because I expected a little bit more of a revelatory experience. I mean, I felt healthier, felt a little more clear-headed. There were many, many benefits and some kind of surprising realizations. But when I got to the end of like that, what I thought was the experiment that the book was documenting, I was also like, geez, I still kind of hate my job. And I still, I've been playing music for a lot longer than I thought I would, and probably longer than I really want to. And I was having a lot of back pain, and I had back surgery, and I was having a lot of joint problems. Like, I really need to like phase out of playing rock drums. So anyway, I ended up quitting my job and I ended up quitting music. And I also have a sort of a joke of a chapter called I Quit Motherhood, which I didn't. My children are adults though, but I did have a sort of a mental adjustment in the way that I thought of my role as a parent. So the book started off as one thing, and it turned into a whole other thing that really was very much about midlife to me.
I thought it was really interesting that the verb you chose was quit. Like, I thought that was like such an interesting choice. You could have said you were detoxing, you were moving on, you were retiring. You do say retiring when you talk about drumming, but there were many other sort of more positive words that you could have used, and yet you specifically chose quit. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about why that choice, because it feels like such it feels like appropriate to what we were seeing socially and culturally during that time, that people were quitting their jobs and were resigning and were sort of like moving on. And maybe the pandemic was the catalyst for change for people.
I think so.
But then you also talk about, I think it's Simone Biles, who took a break from gymnastics, and she said she was quitting because of a whole, and we've seen this in Coco Graf and other athletes who have taken a break, and they get a lot of negative feedback.
Yeah.
And that word feels negative. And like, can you just, I don't mean as a criticism, I'm just really curious about why that was your choice. Why?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I do think that there is an American idea that, you know, quitters never win and that quitting is bad. I think that there is a sort of a Protestant work ethic around that word that we've been taught, like never quit, never give up. And that as Americans, like we value perseverance and we value grit and we value like pushing through. And I chose that word deliberately, partly because of that, and partly because I think it's a powerful, punchy word that, I know I was at such a low point. I was so extremely fed up with myself and with my situation that I needed the power and the punch of that word. Like I quit. It's I think there's a potency to that. But it was also like a conscious decision to want to see, can it be a positive word? Can quitting become a positive thing? Can we turn that around, or can we reevaluate that? And I do think that like that felt very much of the time of the pandemic, with people like you say, quitting their jobs, and you know, language around mental health and sports, and like you said, Simone Biles, like a lot of that, it felt like a necessary reevaluation of the very word and the concept of quitting as potentially a good thing, the right thing to do.
There's drama behind it, right? It's that, like,
there is.
It is. There's weight to that choice that perhaps sends a message to everyone, the seriousness. Yeah. And you write
that I was taking myself seriously.
You wrote, there's another element to all these quitting experiments. I was testing my strength, attempting to prove to myself that I had it in me to transform the chaos of my being into something ordered and dignified. I thought that was really fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it felt existential to me at times.
No, it is. And we should tell the audience that you stopped alcohol, cannabis, sugar, social media, and caffeine. And that, like, the caffeine one sounded really painful to me. Like,
that brings up a lot of feelings in people.
I know. That one hurt my head.
No, I don't necessarily recommend that you quit caffeine. It was complete.
I did once. I once went cold turkey years ago, and I remember my coworkers came to me and said, "Please start drinking coffee again."
They brought you a cup of coffee here, please.
I was like, "Please, it's painful." Kate, what's been the response to Freda's book? Who are the people who are coming into the store and picking up this book?
It's been amazing because, I mean, first of all, Freda has been incredible at driving traffic here. But we've sold over 100 copies of this book so far, which has just been out for a couple of months. And a lot of it is just people walking in, and that title and that cover, they work beautifully together, and they just want to know. And you can pick it up, and the chapters are so short and punchy, sometimes only like a paragraph long, that people can really flip through and get a sense of her voice, which is so charming and funny, and what it's all about. And they just go, "Yep, I want to know more about this." Yeah. So it's been an incredible response to it.
Oh, I love my bookstore.
I think there's one thing about doing this sort of experiment, going on this journey, but there's another thing about writing about it and sharing it publicly that feels very brave to me. That feels, I mean, I love reading memoir, but I don't think I could ever write one, right? I don't know. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about that decision to share it with people. Were you nervous? Did you have anyone in your life who told you, "Oh, don't talk about it"? Like, how did you, and you've written another memoir, so maybe you have worked out these issues before, but how does one approach writing about these intimate parts of their lives or decisions and then sharing them? How do you go about it?
I tend to be pretty private, so it definitely challenges me to do this kind of personal writing. And my first memoir, I think I kept a lot more in. Like I wasn't as forthcoming. I wasn't as open. I wrote more about my kids than I did about myself. Yeah. More willing to write about them. But I wanted to challenge myself, and I don't know. I was reading a lot of very personal writing at the time. What was I reading? Lily Danzinger and Eulabis, and I felt like people, these writers were opening themselves up and sharing, and it added a depth and an intensity to the writing that I was really connecting with, and especially during the pandemic when I felt kind of alone and lonely, and so I was craving more like deeply personal, just open-hearted and honest writing. And as I started to teach a little bit online, like I was encouraging my students, like, why don't you write about what's really going on? And again, like this all feels so wrapped up in the pandemic. Just in a desire to like, let's actually document what we're going through right now. We may owe it to future generations to really write about what this is like. And so I was pushing my students to be more honest and more personal. And I just thought I would turn that advice onto myself. Like, just what would it be like if I wrote about these things, some of these things that come up that were really hard to write about. My publisher also really encouraged me to do that. And then the first editor for this book, Maurice Meyer, wonderful writer, who has 2 short story collections and a novel and kind of a poetry cycle out. She also kept nudging at me. She when she read the first draft, she's like, I feel like you're kind of circling around something here, and like let's come right out with it. Like, let's get into it. And so she pushed me, and I needed that. It added a lot to the subsequent drafts, just to have her kind of poking at me. So yeah, it was a combination of all of those forces working on me.
Excellent. Kate, what is memoir a very popular genre in your store? Because you talk about, like, I know Northwestern's in Evanston, and I'm curious, do you see families? Do you see students come in the store? Like, what's your mix of customers, and then what genre are they gravitating toward?
All of the above.
Okay.
We sell a ton of young adult and sci-fi fantasy, ton of literary fiction, and a ton of memoir. And the customers really run the gamut, but I do see we have a fairly large population who are at midlife, as I am and Freda is, and that's where I've seen a lot of people walking in and saying like, oh yeah, it's one where you really see people read the back cover and say, okay, yeah, that sold itself.
Yeah.
And we have, like you mentioned, Eulabis, who has taught Bookends University because of you, and she's and Megan Steelstrap, both wonderful local essayists. I even, who are kind of doing the same kind of very personal revelation combined with universal themes. And those people, I don't know, it's something about Chicago writers too, just like this community is so supportive no matter kind of what genre you're working in. And whereas, we're not siloed because it's just like, okay, we're all here and we're all kind of trying to do a hard thing. I was hanging out with a bunch of children's writers last night. And so I feel like that bleeds over into who our audience is here at the store too, that it's just very much readers.
Excellent. We have a question from Renee, who actually it's an interesting question. She asks, why a memoir and not a novel? Like, why tell this journey you went on in a memoir versus, I don't know, why not take that and turn it into fiction? How does one decide to write memoir? Like, what is that?
I mean, in this case, I felt like it was like, I couldn't really make this stuff up. And that I wanted the unvarnished truth. I wanted a document of my experience too. I mean, so much of the book grew out of journal entries and me just sort of keeping track of how some of those entries kind of survived in the final manuscript. So yeah, I wanted it to be as kind of raw and unvarnished as possible. But I really am craving writing fiction, and my next book is going to be a novel, definitely.
Ooh. Oh, excellent. Good. Well, definitely.
Thanks for asking.
Oh, good. Yeah, we'll keep our eyes out for that. So there was a description in the book about the quitting of all these different habits or substances, and sort of how you described them, that I thought was really fascinating. You said, if alcohol represented looseness and cool, sugar pleasure and delight, weed magic, and caffeine achievement and focus, social media was attention, validation, and sometimes even connection. It was a lot to give up all that pain and pleasure. I love that line. I thought that was
Thank you.
such a fascinating way to look at all of these addictions, habits that we have in our day-to-day lives without real, like, you know, I drink my tea and I never think about achievement and focus, but in truth, I need that first cup of tea in the morning to get going, right? So it, like, those descriptions I felt were so true. And then you talk, and I want to hear a little bit about that, like that experience of each one being so different, and whether or not you still feel that way now after all this time has passed.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it was fun for me in kind of writing the book up. You know, once I had like all these notes and these journal entries, and I had these sort of periodic moments where I would stop and think like, what is this project? Like, what am I doing? And what do these things mean? And that bit that you read was sort of one of those moments, like just a moment of reflection of trying to make it make sense. So it wasn't just like I quit caffeine, I had bad headaches, and you know, but I don't know, I was always looking for meaning throughout the whole process. And I can't remember what your other question was.
Oh,
I'm so
like, do you
sorry.
still feel that way now? Like, so we should say that you stopped these substances, but then you did go back to them, right?
Yeah, most of them. I quit. There's a chapter called "I Quit Quitting."
Yes.
I'm still off caffeine because I never will have the strength to quit it again. Like I can't go through that again. It was total misery. And even though I think caffeine is fine for most people, I'd become like very, very sensitive to it. It was causing me some problems. So I was like, okay, so that one was permanent. So I've had to find other sources of energy and focus, which continues to be a challenge. Although I mostly have a new baseline with all of that now. Yeah, still trying to figure out how to relate to social media. It was so lovely having a complete break from it, but as you know, as an author and as someone who's trying to promote events in a bookstore and you know promote classes and teach, it's really hard to live without social media. So I feel like I'm kind of wrestling forever. Will be wrestling with my relationship.
Yeah,
With that.
You describe it as like the loneliness of social media, right? Like I was talking to our producer about it before we went live, that like when you were talking about social media, you were talking about how at the age that we are all at, midlife, you sort of basically are looking at your kid's first day of school or like some announcement of somebody's death, right? It's like this,
Yeah.
like, and that like that's mostly what we see, and that like there's very rarely is like a true connection, and it does seem,
Yeah.
it seems so lonely. And then I look at like my TikTok obsessed child, and I think, what are you really getting from that? Are you really having connection? And I don't know that. And I wonder if you hadn't quit these things, if you hadn't really made, you wouldn't have been able to make that understanding. You wouldn't have had
Yeah,
that.
no, I think having the break, having the space, having the distance, like really enhanced my perspective. It gave me a chance to evaluate my relationship with all of these things, social media for sure, just to think about like what was I getting from it? What was it doing that was positive in my life? How was it damaging? So, you know, even though I still don't feel like I have a solution for like how to use that tool or how to be on social media, I at least do feel like I did get some perspective. And I also proved to myself that I can live without it, you know, at least for a while. Like it's possible to take a break. And I think I talk about a lot in the book. I feel like it's a very January book. There's a lot of January themes in it because it starts with January 6th, and it's partly inspired by this concept of dry January, where people give up booze for a month. And sometimes it leads to total sobriety. Sometimes it's just a break. Sometimes there's sort of a reevaluation that goes on. And I felt like that was kind of the way I wanted to relate to all of these things that I gave. Like just take a break and figure out how I can have a healthier relationship with all of these things. But yeah, social media weirdly ended up being like one of the trickiest things to figure out as far as coming back to it. And yeah, I feel like it's like an ongoing question for me.
Well, it's built into so many jobs, like
Yes.
all of our careers. Kate's nodding, right? Like it's part of the story. It has to have an online presence and your events and whatnot. So like eliminating that part entirely is really difficult. I mean, I can probably name on one hand the number of friends I have who aren't on social media, and I always admire
Not
them.
very many.
do
I
that?
know. How do they do it? How do they do it?
How do they remember everyone's birthday? Is usually
I
the way.
know. Yes, I know that alone.
I have really lost touch with people who have gotten off social media
Yeah.
where I'm like, I applaud this, I support it, and I'm never going to see you again.
Yeah, right. There's a loss there for
Yeah.
sure.
It's true. But then the flip side is, you know, things about someone you went to high school with and you haven't seen in 30 years. It's like, I don't,
Yeah.
I don't like to
But
know
you
where
don't.
you live, and yet I know that, you know, your child went to the doctor yesterday. It's like, I don't. It's like information. Sorry, no offense. People are gonna unfollow me now. Like, sometimes I just wonder. I wonder about that, like how much time we spend, and how much doing things that perhaps don't fill our buckets, or don't like, you know, actually further our own goals and our own happiness.
I wrote about time in the book. That was a really big thing. And I felt like that was a huge factor. I mean, with quitting social media, I kind of couldn't believe how much more time I had in the day. Quitting drinking too, like it takes time, you know, if like that's a thing that you're doing. And then the next morning, if you don't feel as well, you kind of lose some hours in the day. I definitely thought a lot about my relationship with time, and the experiment did give me back time. It absolutely did. And I wasn't expecting that. I didn't go into it looking for that. That was an interesting surprise.
Interesting. Kate, I'm really curious about your background. You said at the beginning that you've done everything except actually publish the book, like physically publish the book.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how having all of those different roles, wearing all of those different hats, how it influences your work as a bookseller now. Like, I would imagine it gives you a greater appreciation for the miracle that a book is. But
Yes.
what is it?
But
what do you bring from those different aspects to the work that you do?
The big thing for me, and why I love this, and I'm so glad I'm doing it at this point in my life, is that it's really exciting having been behind the scenes in various ways, with my ego involved in various ways, about whether it was about one of my authors or my own writing, to be out in the world and watch hands go into books, or other way around. I'm not watching hands. I'm watching books go into hands of people who are excited to read them. And that's because, especially when you're working in publishing, you can get so hung up on, well, this author's last book didn't sell that well, and so, you know, we don't know if this is a good risk, and just all of the, like, you're thinking about huge blocks of people that you want to buy books, and then not about the individual person who is going to find a book that means so much to them personally, which is how we all got into it. You know, that's how we become readers, how we become book people. And I always say about publishing, and certainly book selling as well, like, everyone in it is a real book person, because none of us are doing it for the money.
That's for sure.
So, you know, people genuinely love books so much in this world, but then that, you know, comes up against the realities of capitalism all the time. And so it's just exciting to see an older book or a small press book or something go to someone who is just so keen on it.
That's an excellent segue into my next question. Thank you for setting me up so well, which is our audience loves to hear from you what you're reading now. So this is the moment when we do a little bit of book recommendation. So obviously we all are going to read I Quit Everything. We'll put the link below. You can pick up a copy of Bookends and Beginnings. I'm sure you can even get it signed. If you ask
We have several signed copies.
Yes, FREDA will sign copies.
Absolutely.
So what are you reading now? Or what are you really excited about that if someone walked in the store and was looking for a book you might want to put in their hands? Or even like someone comes in and says, oh, I read Freda's book, I love it. What else should I read?
I have an answer to that last one.
Great.
Which I don't even know if we can get them into the camera there, but I set some of them up, which are,
Oh, wait.
I have
I'm doing
4
this
answers. So basically, Ulysses Having and Being Had, which, again, she's marvelous local essayist and Northwestern instructor as well. That's all about that relationship with capitalism, and both the feelings of, you know, the drive to indulge, and then the emptiness that follows. So all of that resonates with Freda's book. Sonia Huber, it is Love and Industry, a Midwestern Workbook, which is similar in its little short, punchy chapters, but they get a little bit longer. But talks a lot about that Midwestern 70s, 80s childhood, which Freda also does,
Yes.
And gets really deeply into class. Stephanie Fu, What My Bones Know, that's a memoir of being diagnosed with complex PTSD and trying to treat it and come to live with it. So that's different, except that she is a very funny writer, and she goes on a whole wellness journey that is kind of like echoes a lot of what's in Freda's thing. We're going from everything from various therapies to yoga and all of those things of that kind of self-improvement push, which brings us to the last one, Gia Tolentino's Trick Mirror, which is essays on self-delusion, I think is the subtitle, but she's got one that, I'm going to blank, so I did write it down. Always Be Optimizing is the name of the essay in there.
Great
that
essay.
Is so good, and about the pressure on women to go through all of this self-improvement that I think resonates a lot with some of the themes in there.
Those are great. Thank you. We're putting links below to pick them up from Bookends and Beginnings. Perfect. You were ready with the memoir recommendation.
Yeah, those were such generous comparisons. Like some of my favorite writers, I love Ulysses so much. And I actually cite that book a little bit, like briefly in my book. So that's really flattering. Thank you. I actually discovered a couple of like new to me writers this year. These are both writers I should have read years ago. But I read the Rachel Cusk Outline trilogy, and I loved it so much. And she has a new book coming out in 2024. So I'm like super, super excited to buy that from Bookends and Beginnings. And I kind of feel like I might need to just go back and get all of her books and read them. I'd read her essays. Like I'd been meaning to read her for so long. I'd read her in the New York Times. And then, I don't know, a friend was just like, I can't believe you've never read any of her books. That's insane. And so I bought all of them, all three of that trilogy here, and just devoured them. I just love the way they're not like anything else. And then the other writer that I also should have read a long time ago, Sigrid Nunez. I read what's it called? What Are You Going Through? Yes. So great. And she also has a new book. I think it's just still in hardcover. So, so I'll either grab the hardcover or wait for the paperback to come out, but I'm really, really excited to read that. And I tackled a really challenging book this year. I read Tristram Shandy.
Oh wow.
Which is sort of a bucket list book. But I read it in the context of the Quarantine Book Club, read by Christopher Frizzell. And so, we read like a certain number of pages every week for many, many months. And that was really super fun and challenging and like rewarding. Like I kind of like the idea of like tackling a big, hard book, at least one every year. So that was it. Oh, but the really fun book that I read this year was, I don't know why I'm saying this year. I guess because it's December. It's like I'm thinking about like the year, but Big Swiss by Jen Began. Is that how you say her name? It was really rollicking and wild and sexy, and
that was really fun.
Super fun read. And I'm excited to read whatever she comes out with next.
Isn't it fascinating? Thank you for those recommendations. And again, we're putting links below. Isn't it fascinating when you look at the books that you've read and you realize there's a gap? Like, oh, I never read this author that is like very well known, maybe award winning, like all my friends have read. I always find that to be perplexing. Like, how does that happen that we read what we read? The sort of.
Yeah, I think there's just too many things to read. Like, there's just like infinite great books. And so in some ways it's exciting. It's like, wow, there's always going to be something that I should be reading right now. Like, there will always be something to look forward to. There's always an amazing book that I haven't read.
And they have such a short shelf life because there are millions published every year. Yeah. We have about 20,000 titles in the store, which is actually pretty big.
Yeah.
But that's nothing compared to what's out there. So, lots of times books don't even get a whole year to really kind of find their legs.
Yeah.
And so, somebody that everybody is talking about one year, they move on.
But if you go into your local indie bookstore like Bookends and Beginnings and you ask the question,
you can order them.
Or you can just say, I feel like I have a gap. You have great booksellers who can help you figure that out.
Absolutely.
And read those books you haven't read before. After you've read I Quit Everything, right? So Freda, you mentioned earlier that you're working on a novel. Can you tell us anything about that? And we totally understand if you can't, because there's a whole bunch of superstition and we want to protect the process. But if there's any tidbit you can share, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I'll share a tidbit. Thank you for asking. So, I'm really in the early stages, but I'm writing a novel about Angela DeAngelis, who was a member of the Symbionese Liberation Army, who very famously kidnapped Patricia Hearst Angela was instrumentally involved in the kidnapping. And she also spent many years in my hometown of Bloomington, Indiana, where she went to college and stayed some time afterwards. And so she's someone that I've been aware of my whole life, pretty much my whole life. And I've always been fascinated by her. And she sadly died in the televised SLA shootout. She was 25 years old when she was killed in the safe house in Los Angeles. So short, but very fascinating life. And I've always wanted to write about her, and now I'm doing it. But I don't exactly know what it's gonna look like, but it's going to happen.
Well, we will keep our eyes peeled for that, and we've included all of your social media below so people can follow you. And Kate, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, as a writer, if there's anything we should be keeping our eyes out for.
I don't know when it's going to come out at this point because I have to finish writing it. It's taking longer than expected, but I have a book that is sort of cultural criticism of the way that we talk about victims and victimhood. That's under contract with St. Martin, and it'll be out one day.
Yay. Wonderful. Oh, wonderful. So we'll include links to your social media as well below so people can follow you and be sure they get news about that. I do want to just ask one more question about the book, Freda, which is my favorite chapter. One of my favorite chapters was when you talked about it's called something like Me and Elton John, or it's the chapter when you talk about your decision to retire from drumming. And I really loved it. I felt like Sir Elton John and I felt like there was such a vibrancy to it, and such like conflict, right? When you love something so much and you've come to this point where I can still love it, but it doesn't have to be the center of my life.
Yeah. It's such it was such a part of my identity, which I write about. Like that was like a lot of it was so hard to let go of. I mean, it was hard to let go of alcohol. It was hard to let go of these other things that really felt like part of who I am. But drumming went even deeper than all of that. I'd been doing it since I was a teenager, and in all of these different bands, it was something that I loved. It was something that I was proud of. It was something that defined me. And so, I was scared to let it go. And I'd tried to leave music before. I tried to quit drumming, a few times. And I just always sort of gravitated back to it, just kind of automatically snapped back to it because it was just the most familiar thing in the world. But it really was time to stop. And, I write in the book that, the baseball players don't play forever. Drumming is incredibly physical, playing rock drumming. And I also, just have become aware, and this is part of the middle-age reflective aspect of the book, that I don't have, infinite years of life. And I've come to love writing so much, to want to work more on writing. I came to writing later in life. So I felt like I had some catching up to do. And basically just if writing is a thing I want to do, it's time to focus more of my time and energy and effort on that, and time to let drumming go. What has helped me is, for one thing, I write that instead of saying that I was quitting drumming, to say that I was retiring drumming, and to keep retired drummer in my bio as part of my identity. It's still there. I can still identify as a drummer. It's just a retired drummer. And so it's just a little thing, but it made a big difference to me. And then the other thing is that I've just begun to think that I am rechanneling my creative energy, that the work and love and time that I poured into drumming, to creating songs and performing, just channeling that into writing now. So it's not so much of a cutting off, right, but just a redirection of that creative energy.
Excellent. What do you hope your readers will take from I Quit Everything? They get to the end of the book. They're reading the acknowledgments. What do you hope that they're thinking?
I hope that no one is thinking that I'm trying to tell them what to do at all. But I would love if it would just inspire people to just be real and honest with themselves, to think about what they can and can't mess with, and what has become unconscious and habitual in their lives, that it might be helpful to shine a little bit of light on.
Yeah. Excellent. Traditionally, our last question goes to the bookseller. You're both booksellers, but this one's for Kate. Kate, please finish this sentence for us. Running a successful bookstore is part hard work, part luck, and part what else?
Part hiring the right people.
Oh.
Obviously us, but also all of my coworkers here I marvel at the different skills and the way that people, you know, become tiny experts in different genres just because of our own reading interests over time. And so, you know that I can send someone to this person for this kind of recommendation and that one. And then watching my colleagues hand sell and watch the books they get excited about and how they talk about them and connect with people that way is delightful. So
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us today, both of you. It's been wonderful to speak with you, to talk about I Quit Everything, Bookends and Beginnings. A reminder to our audience, we include all these links below, so you can go pick up Freda's books, you can pick up Kate's books, you can make a plan to go to Bookends and Beginnings next time you're in the Chicago area. Reminder, they're in Evanston. I have no idea where Evanston is in relationship to Chicago, but I imagine you
right
can
north.
get there.
Yeah.
Right there, not that far.
There's even a train.
There's
there
even a
is.
train. So you're on vacation in Chicago and you think, what should I do today? You should go to Bookends and Beginnings.
Yes.
You can also shop online for the holidays from the store. You can get Freda's book signed, give it to someone in your life who is maybe drinking too much tea. Not me. We'll be back next week, December 13th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time for episode 155, which is a very special episode for us. My co-host Joe and I will share the screen together for our fourth annual holiday show. And we'll also talk about how it'll be a farewell episode as well, as we're putting Authors Love Bookstores on hiatus for 2024. Tune in to find out why we're doing this. We're going to do a look back on all of our episodes. We're going to tell behind the scenes stories. We'll talk about authors who brought their pets on the show. We'll talk about things that went wrong, our favorite guests, our favorite books. Actually, they're all our favorite guests, so I don't know if we'll do that. Please tune in next Wednesday, December 13th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, thank you so much, Freda and Kate, for being with us today.
Thank you. So fun.
So until we meet again, everyone, be well and keep reading. Thanks.